Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Millennial Smark and I'm bringing you the slop, the whole slop, and nothing but the slop. Links are down in the description box below. Boy oh boy, I gotta take you guys on a bit of a trip down memory lane, a bit of a lure, if you will, to give more context in regards to Ric Flair's tweet, because Ric Flair has completely pissed off the IWC. Depending on how you take it, you could say rightfully so, they have every right to be pissed off at Ric Flair. Or you can be like, nah, they're, going a little bit too hard at Flair. He was just joking. Now, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour, and you may say to yourself whether or not Flair was joking, but at the very least, I can give you the context. First and foremost, though, let me tell you what Ric Flair tweeted out that apparently has the IWC completely, out of their mind upset right now. Now, as you guys know, Ric Flair, he has a bit of heat with Jim Ross. Now, whether or not they made up, I don't know. But he put out a tweet after Jim Ross came out of recovery for his cancer surgery, right? He had colon cancer surgery. He said, Jim Ross will always be Jim Ross, seeking attention. Focus on your recovery, JR. Now, you may be saying to yourself, what in the fuck? Why in the fuck? How in the fuck? Jim Ross just came out of surgery and your first remarks to him was he's seeking attention. Focus on your recovery. Now, again, for some people who are not aware of what Ric Flair is talking about at the moment, now, I don't know when they did this interview, but I do have the excerpt right here talking about, and I'm not going to read it verbatim because, Jim Ross and his older age, his speech patterns can be a little bit, a little bit on the skittish side, right? So the transcript in itself is kind of wonky because there's a couple of uhs inside there. Because again, Jim Ross, he's 73 years old, so he can only speak so well. But nevertheless, though, he got sick and tired. I'll just give you the gist, the TLDR. He got sick and tired of Ric Flair constantly making claims that his wife, Jen, she passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately. He got sick and tired of Ric Flair taking claim of the fact that he introduced Jim Ross to his wife. And Jim Ross went out of his way to clarify the situation and say that, essentially it's not as direct as what Ric Flair makes it out to be, right? I don't think he said anything that was terrible. You can look at the excerpt for yourself. I'll leave the link down in the description box below. But again, it was nothing that was really, really bad. Look, like I said, in the end of the day, I know where this is all stemming from. I know. Now, again, did Jim Ross and Ric Flair ever make up from this situation? I don't know. But some of you guys may or may not be aware of the plane ride from hell. It was a situation that happened back in 2002 with all the boys on a plane ride. I think they were leaving, what was the pay-per-view? Was it Insurrection, I think, at the time in 2002, the UK show? I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me on that. But I know it was Raw exclusive because they just started the brand split at that time. And as you guys know, if you're familiar with the plane ride from hell, it's legendary for all the debauchery that was happening on it, some bullshit that was going on with Goldust and, being drunk and trying to serenade his ex-wife Terry Reynolds on the intercom speaker. I think Michael P.S. Hayes, he got his eyebrows shaved or some shit like that, or his hair cut or something like that. Mr. Perfect and Brock Lesnar, they got into a fight on the plane. And one of the other things that happened, also Scott Hall was out of his mind fucking drunk on the plane also. But something else that actually happened too was Ric Flair exposing himself to one of the stewardess and doing a helicopter motion with his penis, allegedly, right? And they went over all this. They went over all this in the episode on Dark Side of the Ring back in, I think, 2021. I think that's when I did the video also on my old channel. But Jim Ross, he didn't say anything disparaging about, here, actually, let me find the link for you guys. I'll read it for you verbatim as far as what happened with the situation, just to kind of give you a little bit of lore, because this goes a little bit deeper than I think what people actually understand, right? Okay, so here I found it. Let's see. Ric Flair says Jim Ross has lost all credibility with him. Again, this is like 3 years ago when Ric Flair made these comments stemming off of the Plane Ride from Hell, because the Plane Ride from Hell, when it was aired during the Dark Side of the Ring, it fucked Ric Flair as far as his, his job, his work. I think they pulled him from a couple of advertisers. I'm not sure if he was working with AEW at the time, but I do remember there was a lot of problems with him and AEW as far as whether or not he was going to show up on television. I don't think he was, though. I could be wrong, but I don't think he was working with AEW. I think he was about to come in, and all this stuff kind of halted all that. But again, don't quote me on that. But nevertheless, though, he kind of thought Jim Ross was going to have his back because him and Jim Ross are friends. Well, again, this was written in 2022. It says, Ric Flair says Jim Ross has lost all credibility with him. And I did this story at that time, too, now that I'm thinking about it. Speaking on the most recent episode of his To Be the Man podcast, Flair was critical of Ross for his appearance on Dark Side of the Ring back in 2021. Jim Ross, and this is coming from Ric Flair, again, this is 3 years ago. He says, Jim Ross lost every bit of credibility with me in life. In spite of calling me, the greatest wrestler of all time, or whatever in his induction, when he jumped on Dark Side of the Ring, Flair said, because all he is starving for and leaning on in life is to be relevant, because he ain't. I can forgive Jim Ross for Dark Side, which I have because there's nothing worth it, but I don't appreciate it. Jerry Lawler texted me. I don't know how many people said, what the fuck did Ross mean? You gotta know when to walk away from Ric Flair, which is what Jim Ross said during the Dark Side of the Ring episode. Well, the WWE learned when to walk away from Jim Ross. I'm going to the 30th reunion. Do you think he is? At the same time, Jim Ross will always be my favorite announcer, Flair will later say. I'm not diminishing, there was a link there. I'm not diminishing his skills. I'm not like Eric, meaning Eric Bischoff, saying I was no good at anything. I'm telling you, Jim Ross was the fucking best, but I also thought he was one of my best friends. And a friend doesn't do that. So, like I said, there's heat between Jim Ross and Ric Flair going all the way back around that time frame. And then with all the stuff that's been happening, as of late with Jim Ross's cancer and then him making that comment, like I said, for people who are saying things like Ric Flair is joking or whatever the case may be, understand there's a time lineage from Jim Ross and the Plane Ride from Hell stuff that Ric Flair absolutely hated Jim Ross over for a long time. I don't know whether or not they made up. I'm not sure. And then these recent comments from Jim Ross pretty much saying Ric Flair didn't do anything as far as introducing him to his wife, or he had very little to do with it. Now you see the context, right? Now you understand the proper context as far as Ric Flair now seeing this tweet and it being questionable whether or not he was joking. So then we get to what Ric Flair said afterwards, because again, he got a lot of heat from this, right? Fans are just eating him up. He kept the tweet up too. Again, the link is down in the description box if you want to see it for yourself. He kept the tweet up. It's still up right now. He might take it down later, so you might want to go catch it, if you will. Take some screenshots or something. But then afterwards, this was probably like maybe 30 minutes ago, he said after the backlash, if you can't take a joke from a 76-year-old man, then you are living life too seriously. It was all harmless, lighthearted fun, just trying to make people laugh and smile. See, the thing is, because I think people are looking at it the wrong way as far as you shouldn't make jokes about people with cancer and stuff like that. They're friends, right? Well, I'm not sure about now, but let's just frame it in the manner of they're friends and they can go back and forth and say whatever they want, and no one should have to get involved within their relationship, right? You can have your opinions, but to get upset at Ric Flair in regards to that, if it's fun banter, that's between two friends. The problem with that is when you bring in the context and then you talk about their recent history, when you talk about the recent comments from Jim Ross. And what it really sounds like is Ric Flair is giving a rebuttal. Now, I'm not sure if Flair was drunk or under the influence when he made the tweet. Like, I don't know if he heard the comments from Jim Ross in regards to his wife and then decided to talk about this afterwards, under the influence, if you will. So I will give him some grace in regards to that. Like I said, I don't want to speculate on people's relationships in regards to making jokes, but I am a commentary channel and this is news in regards to professional wrestling. So all I'm doing is giving my 2 cents. I'm not going to parasocial myself with these two, but I will say that it's a crazy look. It's a crazy look, especially when this isn't Ric Flair's first time going after people that he has problems with, man. He says a lot of wild shit. A lot of wild shit. If he does not like you, he will come after you. I'm pretty sure some of you guys are familiar with his feud with Bruno Sammartino. You know, I'm pretty sure some of you guys are familiar with his feud with Mick Foley. You know, I'm pretty sure some of you guys, you might be familiar with his feud with, Shane Douglas. I remember that. You you might be familiar with his stuff with Bret Hart. These are problems that he legitimately had with people outside of the ring. I heard stories about him and Teddy Long. I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with that too. Hell, I mean, not super recent, but as recent as maybe 4 or 5 years ago, he had some heat with Becky Lynch, over the name bullshit. I know Charlotte Flair got involved with all that. Also, that probably could be a wrench that kind of fucked up Becky and Charlotte's relationship, because as you guys know, they're not really close friends, or at least not as close of friends as they used to be a couple of years ago. I wouldn't be surprised if that whole situation with Flair and Becky Lynch is one of the main concerns or main reasons as to why Charlotte and Becky aren't really friends or close friends like that anymore. You know what I mean? So it's not as if Flair doesn't have a history of putting his foot in his mouth. He says a lot of crazy shit, a lot of wild shit. And the only thing you can really chalk it up to is the fact that the dude is 76 years old. But again, like these feuds, these personal feuds with Ric Flair and some of these superstars, they go back as far as with Foley, this shit goes back like 30 years. They had a fight in catering. I want to say like maybe 04, 05, 06, around that time frame, because Flair disrespected Foley and called him nothing more than a glorified stuntman. He called him a glorified stuntman. That whole feud with Flair and Mick Foley in 06, when they were having their SummerSlam match or building up to their SummerSlam match, they were feeding off of real life animosity. They got into a legitimate shoot fight in catering. They did. So it's not as if what Flair is saying about Jim Ross, especially knowing the situation Jim Ross is currently in right now, doesn't come off as callous. I wish Flair would just fuck, man. He needs to act his age, bro. He needs to act his age. You can tell a joke when it's a joke versus when you're being serious, and the timing and the coincidence of it, it's not random. It's not random. I mean, this conspicuously got tweeted out a day or two after Jim Ross made those comments about Ric Flair constantly, name dropping his wife, who's no longer with us, and constantly making claims that, hey, man, if it wasn't for me, Jim Ross and Jen, they would have never met. It's like, I mean, I'm pretty sure Buddy, who just lost his wife, don't want to consistently hear you making comments like that, especially when they might not even be true. And then when he kind of checks you on that, and then your response is to, he's attention seeking. It's like, and this is happening right after the man just got out of cancer surgery. It's like, bro, you tripping. You wilding right now, Rick. You wilding, bro. You wilding. And I have the utmost respect for Ric Flair. He is arguably the greatest wrestler of all time. He is incredibly influential in every aspect of professional wrestling. Every generation he has been relevant in for the most part. And you want to give him a grace because of that respect. But man, oh man, Flair, he stays putting his foot in his fucking mouth. But, like I said, giving you guys the context and just giving you the lore, that's all I can do. I can just leave it up to you guys whether or not you believe it to be a joke. Your opinions as far as Ric Flair is considered, I know people are going to probably come in the comment section. They're going to be like, he's a piece of shit. he's a racist, you know, all this other kind of stuff. Look, if you can just focus on this portion right here, like the stuff with Jim Ross. I mean, I can't control your language, and I'm pretty sure you're going to come out with a bunch of stuff that's very irrelevant in context and comparison to Flair right now with Jim Ross. I am just giving you context. That's all I'm doing. That's all I'm doing, right? I'm just giving you context. I'm not here to elaborate or speculate on any of those feuds. I'm just here to give you context as to why I believe Flair put his foot in his mouth, and he has a history of making these kinds of judgment calls when they were just going out there and blurting out his mouth. I'm not here to tell you guys, let's go down the history of Ric Flair and propose things that happened 30, 40 years ago and suggest that he's the same person today. I'm not asking you to fucking do that. Although some people are going to do it anyways. It is what it is. It's the nature of the game, right? No pun intended. But with that being said, talk on down in the comment section below. As always, my name is Devontae, aka Millennial Smart, and I'll be catching you guys later. A deuces and a P ice.